Hi, I'm Debra Rudd, and today I'm going to be talking about the certification test and specifically practical approaches for deciding whether to amend your tax returns to meet the certification test. This presentation is all in the context of expatriation. And expatriation, as I'm talking about it, is a term that has a special meaning for tax purposes. Under the tax rules, an expatriate is either a U.S. citizen who gives up their U.S. citizenship or a U.S. green card holder who gives up their green card after having it during 8 of the last 15 years. And of all the people that expatriate, only people who are covered expatriates have to pay exit tax. And there's 3 financial tests to determine if you're a covered expatriate. You're covered if you fail any one of these 3 tests. If your net worth is over $2 million, you'll be covered. If you have a high enough 5-year average tax liability, and in 2025 that number is $206,000, then you're a covered expatriate. Or if you didn't file your tax returns or pay your taxes for the 5 years before your expatriation year, then you're covered. And all other expatriates are just not covered expatriates. Now, that third one on the list didn't file tax returns or pay taxes for the 5 years before the expatriation year. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. And here is the certification test question on Form 8854, Part 2. It's right at the bottom of page 1. And it asks, do you certify, under penalties of perjury, that you have complied with all of your tax obligations for the 5 preceding tax years? See instructions. And then you can check the yes box or you can check the no box, and that's it. It doesn't give you room for any other explanation. So you're probably wondering, what requirements, what years exactly are you talking about with this question? So the best way to look at this is to go directly to the tax code where this comes from. And that says, this section shall apply to any individual if such individual fails to certify under penalty of perjury that he has met the requirements of this title for the 5 preceding taxable years, or fails to submit such evidence of such compliance as the Secretary may require. So I put 2 sections of this in bold. Requirements of this title. This title is Title 26. And when it says the 5 preceding taxable years, I take that to mean the 5 calendar years before the expatriation year. Now, interestingly, where it says requirements of this title, that is referring to Title 26, but if you're familiar where the FBAR rules come from, that's actually a separate title of the code. So it looks like, under the way this is written in the code, technically the FBAR is not part of the certification test. Now, there's more information in the Form 8854 instructions and in Notice 2009-85. On this slide, I have the wording from the Form 8854 instructions. And this one's a little bit more descriptive, and it explains a little bit better what years and what requirements apply. So I put those sections in bold. They specify that they are looking for the 5 tax years ending before the date on which you expatriated. So it's the 5 tax years before the expatriation year. And it's looking for income tax, employment tax, gift tax, information returns, and they want you to have paid all your tax liabilities, interest, and penalties. So it's a little more specific than the code. And Notice 2009-85 contains actually very, very similar language to the form instructions, basically more or less the same exact thing. Little bit more descriptive here though. So what I want to talk about here is how to meet these requirements, because everyone makes mistakes. Even with the best of intentions, you can have a typo on your tax returns. Maybe you forgot about a tiny piece of income. Maybe you assumed 15 years ago that some little account didn't need to be reported, and maybe that was actually the case, but maybe over time something changed. You had another account that would have added together with the first account, created a filing requirement, but you forgot about it. Things happen. People make mistakes. On top of that, the international tax filing requirements can be very complicated and difficult to understand. That's why people like me exist, because it's not expected that the average person will know how to comply with all the requirements. Even knowing all the requirements, even knowing everything, it's still possible you could miss something, make a mistake, do something wrong. And with the certification test, it's a binary yes or no. You don't get an opportunity to explain. There's no thresholds, there's no de minimis rules. It's simply, did you comply with all your requirements or did you not? So how do you approach this? And one of the questions I think about first is, what about trivial mistakes? Because we all make mistakes. And my opinion on this is, I don't think you need to go hunting for them. You don't need to look at every single number and every single checkbox on your tax return. I think as long as you report everything in good faith to the best of your ability, I'm not the IRS, but my opinion is that should be sufficient to pass this test. Of course, if you know about an issue or you see an obvious issue as soon as you open your tax return, then you should probably fix that. And you should exercise a reasonable standard of care. Obviously, you shouldn't be turning a blind eye to issues that are easily discoverable. So for little stuff, I would say don't lose sleep over it. But if you see it, if you find it, if you know about it, why not fix it? The next category is issues you know about. And it's very common in my experience for a taxpayer to know that something was left off of a prior return, or maybe to suspect that, their tax preparer didn't fully report something the way they should have based on something they've read since then. Now, in general, you have no legal duty to amend a tax return. Taxpayers are not required to amend. The IRS says that you should amend. But in the context of the certification test, it's a little bit different, because you're certifying under penalty of perjury for purposes of this test to say whether your prior returns included everything or not. So when you're signing this statement, if you want to be able to say yes, it's a good idea to amend issues that you know about, even the tiny things. And the way I think about this is, if it's a small issue, it should be easy to fix, so why not do it? And if it's a big issue, you really should fix it to be able to say you passed the test. So either way, if you know about any issues with your tax returns, either it's a quick, easy fix, so you do it, or it's a big fix, so even if it's not quick and easy, you really need to do it. And for issues you don't know about, what I mean by this is, maybe you suspect something might be wrong, but you don't know. Maybe your tax preparer has shown themselves to be a little bit untrustworthy. Maybe they cut a corner somewhere that you weren't comfortable with, and you wonder where else they might have cut corners. Maybe you realized that you're the only client like you in your situation, and you don't think your tax preparer has experience with other clients who have international issues. And then lastly, maybe you're self-preparing your returns and you've done the best you can, but you're not very well versed in international issues, so you don't know if maybe you missed something. All of these are possible issues that might apply to your situation. So there's some reasonable approaches you can take to check if you meet the certification test. First, make a list of all your accounts and assets. If you're planning to expatriate, you're going to be doing that anyway because you're going to be checking your net worth. So when you make that list of all your accounts and all your assets, check and make sure they've been reported on your tax returns. Check your old communications, emails, etc. to see if you told your tax preparer about every account you were supposed to. Look on the actual forms on your tax returns. Your FBAR, also known as FinCEN Form 114, and Form 8938 should contain your foreign accounts and other financial assets. Schedule B should have interest, dividends, and then there's questions at the bottom about foreign accounts and trust. Make sure those questions are answered correctly. Schedule D, that's where you would see stock sales. Form 8621, passive foreign investment companies. Usually this is foreign mutual funds for most people. Form 5471, 8865, 8858, this is foreign corporations, partnerships, disregarded entities. If you have a foreign corporation and a 5471 never showed up on your tax returns, that might be an issue. Form 3520 and 3520A, this is where you would report foreign trusts, some foreign retirement plans and accounts, and gifts and inheritances from foreigners. So if you had any of these events, any of these entities, any of these things, you can check in these places to see if they were reported. Or if you self-prepared your returns and you know you didn't include these, then you know you might have an issue. And at this stage, if you're fixing things to comply with the certification test, I would strongly recommend talking to a tax preparer, an actual professional who does this type of work routinely. If you think something is missing that should be reported, or if you told your tax preparer about foreign assets, but they didn't ask follow-up questions and those assets didn't appear anywhere on your tax returns, or if you didn't tell your tax preparer about certain items because you assumed they wouldn't be reportable in the US, which is very common for foreign pensions, retirement accounts, things like that. If any of these apply to you, then I would recommend that you talk to a tax preparer who's experienced in international reporting requirements. Now, the way that we approach these situations is if a client suspects that something is missing or wrong, I'll take a look and let them know if I see any problems, but I do not offer a full certification test review to confirm for them if they meet the requirements or not. And the reasons for that, there's multiple reasons really. There's a lot of liability risk there because I'll be basically certifying for someone if they meet the requirements or not, but I only know how much they've told me. And I feel like sometimes when clients do this, they're basically just looking to somehow offload the liability that they personally have for preparing a correct and accurate tax return. And I don't really want to be a part of that situation. I'm very happy to help fix a problem, but I don't want to just be someone who absorbs liability and provides no value. Another reason I don't do it is because it's expensive and time consuming. To actually do this thoroughly, I would need to gather a vast amount of information about each person's tax situation, basically do the work to prepare a return more or less so that I can check that every number is right and that everything is reported in the correct place. So in a lot of ways it becomes just as expensive or possibly more expensive than the original fees they paid for tax preparation. Another reason is that it's kind of sad when I find tiny little problems that don't really matter much, and I tell clients, you know, there's no de minimis threshold, there's no minimum here, so that $1 of interest income that you left off, maybe you should consider amending if you want to check yes on the certification test. I don't like to have that conversation with people. And also, lastly, in my experience, usually people know or suspect if they have a problem that matters. I've had so many clients I've worked with planning for expatriation who will tell me, everything's ready to go. I know my tax returns are right, except I know this one account was left off. And, I never realized I had to report it. I figured it out later. So I know I need to fix this before I expatriate. And that's the experience I have most of the time, is that people know if something is wrong or if something is missing. So if you're in the situation where something's wrong, something's missing, and you need to fix your tax returns, you really want to do it before you expatriate so that you meet the certification test as of your expatriation date. And there's some potentially, tricky timing issues, like let's say you expatriate in January of one year, but your tax return for the prior year isn't even due yet. Do you meet the certification test? My advice in those situations is just make sure that you file everything on time so that no one can say you don't meet the certification test. You're in a situation where the stakes are high, so don't mess it up. You're gonna, if you decide to amend, file amended tax returns, include any missing income and information returns. What I mean by that is don't fix one thing but fail to fix another thing. If you're gonna amend the return, fix everything, even the tiny little stuff. So if you have some very, very tiny little issues and then one bigger issue, and if all you had was the tiny issues that didn't matter, you would maybe not amend. But because of the bigger issue you're definitely going to amend, then in that situation, you fix the big issue and the tiny issues. You don't just fix the big issue and leave the tiny issues unfixed. If you have penalty risk, you may be able to take advantage of the streamlined procedures or delinquent FBAR submission procedures to avoid penalties. And that's something where, if we're working on that, we'll refer a client to a tax controversy lawyer to advise them on those specific issues. But generally, just start early because it takes time to gather information, prepare returns, and submit them possibly under an IRS program. All right, thanks for listening. Unfortunately, this topic, we don't really have a lot of very specific guidance from the IRS, so it's a little tricky to navigate, but bottom line, always err on the side of caution, and that should help keep you safe. If you want to talk to me about these types of situations, my contact information is on this slide. And lastly, this presentation is not legal or tax advice. Please don't use it to avoid penalties. Hire a professional to help you if you need it. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.